life is a mess and you're totally stressed out, just call Trent. Just call Trent. When your wife is cold as ice and you need some advice, just call Trent. Just call Trent. He'll shoot it straight and he won't say no. He'll just give you that advice and say, well, there you go.
Oh, hello, and welcome to another episode of There You Go with Trent Mabry. I, of course, am your host, Trent Mabry. It's another special edition of the podcast this week. I interviewed comedian Bill Scheft. He was Letterman's head monologue writer. He also started out as a stand-up. We talk about him starting out as a stand-up, doing comedy with Larry David, Gilbert, Gottfried, talking about getting the job at Letterman, some behind-the-scenes stories about that, Chris Elliott, a lot of fun stuff. So here it is, my talk with Bill Scheft. So thanks for doing this, man.
My pleasure.
So where are you from originally?
Boston. I grew up in Boston, and I've been in New York since 1980. So, yeah, I'm a New Yorker.
Yeah. When did you realize you wanted to do something with comedy?
Well, if you ask my mother, she'll tell you when I was 4, we were in the barber shop, and I had very long eyelashes when I was a kid. And a woman said, oh, what lovely long eyelashes. Do you use mascara? And I said, no, Noxzema. It was the first joke I ever told. 4 years old. My mom fell out. And I was a kid, growing up in the 60s and used to listen to comedy records and watch comics on the Tonight Show. And I always loved it. I always wanted to be a writer, which is what I turned into. But I was a comic for 13 years. And that was one of those things where I always looked at it as a hobby. When I was in college, I won my undergraduate talent show doing stand-up. I did stand-up like once a year between the ages of 18 and 22. And just to show myself that I could do it.
Right.
And then I was a sports writer in Albany, New York. And before I left the paper, they opened a club in Albany and they had comics. And a guy at the paper said, you should go down there and do stand-up. And they used to pay in food, which is, that was all I needed. And I wrote, Jerry Seinfeld once said, you write 20 minutes your first week as a comic, and then you spend the next 20 years writing the next 20 minutes or whatever it is. And so I wrote enough. And then I was with the paper a year and a half, and I left the paper. I quit. And the rumor was, oh, he's moving to Manhattan to become a comic. And I said, no, I'm moving to Manhattan. I'm going to be a freelance sports writer. Well, nobody told me you can't live on being a freelance sports writer. It just doesn't. And so I wandered into, after a month or so in New York, I wandered into Catch a Rising Star on December 29th, 1980 to audition. And I did well, but not well enough to pass audition.
Mm-hmm.
The woman that was running audition night thought I was funny but arrogant, which is accurate. And so she made me, I had to audition another 5 times before I finally passed in June of 81. And then I got even with that woman. I eventually made her marry me. And Adrian Tulsh, who used to run audition night at Catch a Rising Star, was the center of the stand-up universe. I don't care, the Comedy Store, okay, but there was nothing like Catch a Rising Star in the late 70s, early 80s. And I was lucky enough to be a part of that. And I was also lucky enough that when I passed, shortly after I passed audition and became a regular, that was when the comedy boom started. And all of a sudden, all these clubs opened up all over the country and you could make a living as a stand-up. Before that, you just couldn't. I mean, maybe a couple of guys, like maybe you get lucky and open for a singer or a band,
right?
Or maybe you can get on the Playboy Club circuit, but there wasn't all these clubs. And So they opened up, and I made a living for 13 years. It was, I know you had Jeff Altman on here,
Yeah.
right? And Jeff was, I would say he was the generation before me. I know Jeff well. And, but he got a lot of work as an actor, which is how you could supplement. But, so I was very lucky, but I always wanted to be a writer because I always, look, I did it for 13 years. The first 6.5 years, I loved it because, you're in your 20s and you're on the road, and you get up at 1 and you drink free and you eat, whatever you want to eat. And, you behave like someone being on the road with no
Right.
response. Then you have to go up at night and do 45 minutes or an hour. And then about 6.5 years in, I realized, I think I'm an introvert. I think I'd rather just write. And I was fortunate enough to go to Harvard, but I was misfortunate enough that I decided to write for the Crimson, the newspaper, rather than the Lampoon. So I had no in on getting a job as a comedy writer. It took me a long time. And I was lucky enough, again, the magic number of 6. It took me 6 submissions to finally get hired by the Letterman show in 1991. And then I was there for 24 years.
Right. Who were some of the guys around when you first started out in New York?
I emceed shows. I became a house MC at Catch a Rising Star, which was a great gig. It was me. I replaced Bill Maher. There were 3 house MCs at Catch a Rising Star: Adrian Tolsch, my late wife, Bill Maher, and J.J. Wall, who became, a big writer and producer and was a comic and Bill Maher did his first Tonight Show, killed, and shortly thereafter moved to LA, and I replaced him as a house MC. And it was, it was one of the few jobs that paid. So you could, you worked long, you worked 9 to 2,
right.
whatever. And so I was very lucky that I was making a little money at the beginning. But I came the half generation after Seinfeld and Miller and Paul Reiser started about 5 years before me. Mark Scheft, Glenn Hirsch, Carol Leifer, Adrian, Abby Stein. I mean, and then I came, and I was, this is a New York class, and I was in with Larry Ambrose, my best friend, Schmocken Valley, the Funny Boys, John Mendoza, John Heyman, Dom Herrera. They were all of maybe they started a year before I did or whatever, but Rich Scheidner was in the generation, it was in the half generation before, Rick Overton, all these guys. And so, I mean, I emceed shows, and this didn't happen once in a while. This happened more than a little. I emceed shows where you'd have Jerry Seinfeld, Paul Reiser, Rodney Dangerfield, David Brenner, and then Robin Williams would come in. And, that happened a lot because at Catch, the MC booked the show. The show wasn't booked in advance. The MC chose who was going to go on next, depending on who was in the bar. It was unlike no other show, no other comedy club had ever been run that way.
Yeah.
So, and I also came to Catch right after Pat Benatar left and became a star. Pat Benatar, well, the first star that came out of Catch Rising Star was Freddie Prinze, who was 19.
Yeah, I have his album right behind me.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I wrote a piece for New York Magazine on that.
I know. I was going to ask you about that.
And so the Improv opened before Catch a Rising Star. The first comedy club ever was Pips in Brooklyn. Then the Improv opened, and then Catch a Rising Star opened a few years after the Improv. And Freddie Prinze was the first guy to come out of there. And Richard Belzer was the MC, a good friend of mine. Richard Belzer was again, the generation, maybe, was the full generation before me. And he really put the place on the map in terms of being an MC and being someone that people came to see. And Richard Jenney was in my class. So, a lot of, all these guys. So I'm very lucky. It was a great time to be a comic. And all of a sudden, all these clubs opened on the road and you could make a living. And there were a couple of factors. First of all, these sleazy club owners realized they could make more money. They take the disco ball down, put up a mic, and you could fit more people in, and they would be sitting and drinking. So they would drink more, and you could charge a cover, and you could run multiple shows on the weekend.
Right.
And that was, it was a good place to launder Coke money. And so that was one factor. But the big factor, and people talk about HBO and television popularizing stand. The thing that really created the comedy boom to me was when Reagan deregulated the airlines, and there were all these cheap airlines like People Express and Braniff, and I can't remember the others, but all of a sudden these clubs all over the country could fly New York acts really cheaply. So I could fly down to Houston and work the Laugh Stop, and my airfare was $98 round trip.
Yeah.
And they all of a sudden it gave those clubs legitimacy. And my wife and I were on the road 30 weeks a year, and we could have been on the road more, but we wanted to stay in New York and work because out there was not show business. Nothing was you were not going to get discovered at the Funny Bone.
Right.
And the places where people came in to see you was Catch a Rising Star, the Comedy Store, the Improv, and on both LA. And so that was, yeah.
Was Larry David around? I know you guys are friends. Was he doing stand-up at that time?
So this is great. So now Larry David. So now I pass at Catch a Rising Star. So I'm a regular now. And it's December of 1981. And what I didn't know, because I hadn't been there, was that in December, all of the New York acts that moved to LA, they come back to New York to visit their families. So the shows, which were great to begin with, all of a sudden, a Richard Lewis and Brenner and these people that live at, and so I'm in the bar one night, and I see a guy. He looks familiar, and it's Larry David is here. Now I don't know him as a stand-up. I know him from Fridays.
Right. Yeah.
And they go, Larry David's here. And me and Ron Zimmerman, who was in my class and became a fine writer and television producer. And we were comics back then. He had just moved up from Washington. And Larry David is pacing in the bar at Catch. He's just pacing. And Ron Zimmerman says to him, why are you worried? Why are you pacing? And Larry David looked at him and said, do you know Woody Allen used to throw up before he went on? And I said, I got to go see this guy. And he went on stage, and he goes on stage, and his first three lines just kill. And then he does a line that does okay. And he says, yes, it's really hot in here. And it's prime time. It's 10 o'clock. The audience is packed. They're a great audience. Then he does two lines that kill. One line does okay. It's really very hot in here. Now he does one line kills, one line doesn't. You pay these kind of prices, and then the air conditioning is faulty. And then he does like two lines in a row that kind of get okay. Is it hot in here? And then somebody in the audience says, hey, what's your problem? And like, my problem is with you fucking people coming in here and he storms off the stage. And of course, I thought at the time, wow, this is really something. I bet this doesn't happen very much. Well, with Larry, it would happen frequently. And Larry and he moved back to New York in the mid to late 80s, like 85, 86, 87, and worked on Saturday Night Live for a year. And we became friends, and he was still doing stand-up, and we became friends. And I was lucky enough to be in a review of his sketches that got cut from Saturday Night Live, me and a bunch of other people. And and we became, we became good friends. And I want to tell you that I know three people that became better human beings after they got really famous. He's one. Chris Rock is another, who I've known since he was 18, and Dennis Leary. I've
Really?
known all these people, and I was always very fond of them.
Hmm.
And of course, you know, if somebody is funny, that just forgives everything.
Right.
The only capital offense is to not be funny. But those are the three people that are better human beings than they were. And not that they were bad guys, but you hear so many stories of people when they get money and fame.
Right. Yeah.
How can you not? How can you not be an asshole? Really, seriously.
Yeah.
But so yeah, those are the three.
Yeah. That's
I know I'm
interesting.
forgetting somebody. I don't really think I am.
Yeah. But you hear you hear all these stories where Larry would do his like Usted joke, and if they didn't like that, he would just storm off stage.
Right. Yes. And yeah, he was, and one time, Larry he used to do a few different bits involving Hitler, and he had a bit that he did about Hitler going to a show and seeing a magician and going backstage and making the magician tell him how he made the rabbit disappear, like, and threatening him. Okay. And it was, classic high concept,
Yeah.
Larry David. And then he did like another, and some woman says, out of the audience says, we don't want to hear about Hitler. We don't, why you did. And Larry just goes into the mic and just starts saying, Hitler, 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 Hitler. And she gets up and walks out, and everybody's laughing. And then she and I think she stopped at the entrance to the showroom and looked back, and he just went, Hitler. And then so there were a lot of those incidents with Larry, but there were times where, I mean, nobody did the stuff that he did. My wife used to say he's the only comic other than myself that I ever taped in the room.
Oh, yeah. That's fun. What about one of my favorite comics, Gilbert Gottfried? Was he around then?
Gilly. Now, Gilly, again, when I started, it was a year after Gilbert had been let go at Saturday Night Live, along with everybody in that purge. Right. And he was understandably wounded by that. So he would go on very late. Of course, he was well known. You could put him on any time, and he was renowned, and comics loved him. And so he would go on very late. And if you were bringing him up, you could not say Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's funny that you bring up Gilbert and Larry, because I would say, and I've told them both this, back then, we were all worried. We knew how funny they were. We were worried about both of them. How are they ever going to make a living? They're not for everybody. And of course, with Gilbert, we worried for the two of them if they were ever going to work. And with Gilbert, we always worried if he was ever going to get laid. So those are the two things. And of course, Gilbert is married a woman not from this earth. There's two kids.
Yeah.
And I remember Adrian and I going down to the Bottom Line. And the Bottom Line was a great club, and it sat 500 people. It was a great room for comedy. They had mostly music acts, but it was a great room for comedy. I worked there many times, and Gilly was there. And I guess Aladdin had just hit.
Mm-hmm.
So he had broken through, and it was packed. And he did an hour of his weird, his stuff that nobody else does.
Yeah.
And at the end, it's 500 people, standing ovation. And Adrian looked at me and said, Gilly, look at that. You know, like he was going to be fine.
Yeah.
And he used to do, the stuff that he would do, he used to do a thing, what do I want to say about him? They're not surreal. They were like existential impressions.
Mhm.
And he would say, Humphrey Bogart in the post office, stamps. You know, Peter Lorre, when you're telling a story and you're taking too long and you're not going to get to the point. And, you know, Bela Lugosi, when you ask him what time it is and he's not wearing a watch. Den. You know, it was just phenomenal. He was so gifted. You know, he would grab the mic and have his eyes squeezed shut. And many people believed he was blind. Many people.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And, but he was, and he and I talk about this. He was a guy that off stage, the dirtier the joke, the more he loved it. But dirty jokes were the jokes that you would tell each other off stage. And then, ironically, you know, when he goes out on the road, there's so much of his act that's dirty.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like he is the kid getting away with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I adore him. I adore him. He started when he was 17.
Yeah, I started when I was 17 as well. We
Nice
mentioned
credit.
thank you. We mentioned Freddie Prinze. I wanted to ask you about your article. I read your article. I had watched his first debut on the Tonight Show before. I had no idea the backstory behind that. Would you mind talking about
Well,
that?
I can tell you here. So here's what happens. So my wife dies in December of 2016, and we were married 27 years. We were together 34 years, and if you have 90 minutes and you want to laugh much more than cry, go to YouTube and punch in Adrian Tolsch Memorial, and I you know, I was numb. And then this guy from New York Magazine, he writes me and he says, we're doing this thing, the 500 funniest moments. I can't even remember, it was some sort of New York Magazine survey.
Mm-hmm.
And we want you to be a judge. And I said, well, when do I have to start? I said, my wife just, and they said, well, the first of the year. And I said, you know what? Okay. So I do this and I'm involved with a lot of people, and it's lovely, distracting work. And there's a lot of stuff that you forget about and a lot of moments. And then the guy says to us, the judges, hey, if anybody wants to take one of these moments and do a piece on it, let us know. And, you know, and I'd like to talk about this because I know how to get a hold of people.
Right.
You know, because I started as a reporter and I did this piece. You know, there's nothing better for a reporter than when somebody on the other end of the phone says, how'd you find me? It's just the greatest thing that can happen. Mm-hmm. And it's happened a few times in my life. And I had Belzer, I had Rick Newman, who owned Catch a Rising Star. Mm-hmm. I had John Mendoza, who had a relationship with Freddie. And the one guy that I had Peter LaSalle, who I worked with at Letterman, who was the friggin' executive producer of Tonight Show. And the only guy I needed a guy named Craig Tennis, who was the talent coordinator at the Tonight Show before the crazy drunk Jim McCauley. Mm-hmm. But and I found him, and he was great. And I got to put it all together, and that whatever you got to see is a cleaner version. There was one version on YouTube that a woman in Staten Island had bought for like $15, and I talked to her about it, and And I got to see the whole thing because, what you know and what you remember, and I have a good memory. I don't know where my keys are, but I have a good memory. And it was amazing to see. And then Johnny understanding sort of the moment, and he had to call attention to it. And I'm not going to say what he said because it makes me very emotional because when he talks about, he said, we have a lot of guys that come out here and they're funny, but the audience says, yeah, he's funny, but we don't really like him. He said, and you have that thing and you're going to go far. And this show has been, and I have to say that about my act. I was a solid comic, but I was not anybody that the audience was going to relate to, or that the audience that had that accessibility. I just didn't have it. I didn't have that draw gene. You look at somebody like Rosie O'Donnell, who I've known since she was 18. Rosie was a pretty good comic, but Rosie had this thing on stage where, oh, she looks like my aunt. She looks like my cousin.
Right.
It was an instant thing. And she also worked really hard. And I've really I've always admired that about her. Like a guy like Tracy Morgan, who I've worked with. I mean, I can tell you, I can name the guys that really had that thing, the men and women that had that thing, as opposed to the men and women that were strong acts, but the audience didn't relate. And this because you've been out there, what a draw is,
right,
and what a draw isn't.
Yeah.
And for the 3 people out there that are listening or watching here, this is what a draw is. Okay. A draw is somebody that goes into a club and, okay, fine. He or she sells out the weekend. But what makes him a draw is that the second the show is over, everybody goes back to the front and says, when is so-and-so coming back? Because I'm going to buy 4 now. Mm-hmm. That's what a draw is. I opened for Andrew Dice Clay for a year. My wife opened him for a year before me, the year before when he was just huge, not kaboom.
Yeah.
And I worked in ballparks with him. I worked in stadium, in arenas with him. And there was a great club in New Jersey called Rascals. I think it was the best club in the country. 3 brothers ran it. It was a wonderful place. They treated you great. The audience was great. And here's the other thing that a draw does. A draw sells out in reverse. A draw sells out Saturday, Friday, Thursday. That's how a draw. Okay, so Dice, I worked with him. It would have been January 1989 or 1990. Let's say 89. And he was booked. So I'm booked to do 2 shows with him on a Wednesday night. Okay. And then it becomes 2 shows Tuesday, 2 shows Wednesday. And then it becomes 2 shows Monday, 2 shows Tuesday. And then it becomes the whole month of January, 2 shows Monday, 2 shows Tuesday. And I think that he made, and back then, think about this, I think he made 250 G's. And I said to him, which is a lot of money.
Right.
And I said to him, Dice, I said, you could like cancel, you could like not do anything for the rest of the year. And when people asked you what you did for a living, you could say, I work Rascals in New Jersey, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in January. That's what I do for a living. And that was astonishing to see. And so, okay.
Yeah. So you mentioned, you mentioned submitting like 6 times to get on Letterman. How'd that come about? Did they see your stand-up? Did you submit a packet? Or
I was trying to get on the show as a comic. I came so close at both the Tonight Show and Letterman. And a lot of good comics should have gotten the Tonight Show and didn't get it. And I was one of them. Mm-hmm. But here 35 years later, I can tell you with pretty much with certainty, I would have gone on the Tonight Show. I would have killed my first time. I would have gone back and I would have done okay, and that would have been it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And guys like Dave Letterman did it 3 times and kaboom, you know. But what are we? Oh, wait a minute. What are we talking about? I'm sorry.
getting the writing job.
So I always wanted to be a writer. So I submitted to the Letterman show in 84, 85, 86, 87. Then I took a couple years off, and then I submitted. But I didn't know how to submit, and I knew people over there, and you know. But like I said, I had the wrong Harvard connection, and I was not writing the right submission.
Mm-hmm.
I just wasn't, because I didn't know. And then my wife was a member of the Friars, and I was good friends with Bob Morton, who was the executive producer of the show. And so it's 1991. It's October. I see him at brunch, and I say to him, I go over to him. I say, "How's it going? You looking for anybody over there? Are you looking for?" He says, "No, we're all set." He says, "But you know what? Write jokes. Dave is always looking for jokes." Now, he said that to me, and I thought, really? Because his monologue at the old show was 3 jokes. Some nights it was 2, and they were so conversational. They were almost anti-jokes because the show had a directive: do not be like the Tonight Show.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, it wasn't a monologue. They were opening remarks, and they were so conversational. They just did not seem like jokes to me. They were funny, but it was all so personality based, and I didn't think of it. I didn't think to, you know, when I would do a submission, I would dash off 2 asides. They were almost like asides. I said, "Oh, well, I'm done with that part." And then I would try to develop.
So you're like submitting like sketch ideas and
sketch ideas and questions. I was doing guest questions too,
because
guest questions were funny.
Yeah.
And I was doing that type of stuff. So I was so clueless. And I also scripted the show like it was a friggin' movie or something. So I didn't know what I was doing. And I don't think I can say that enough. So I go, okay, fine. So I started writing. I wrote 10 jokes a day. And this is how long ago it was. And I would finish writing my 10 jokes, and I would walk over to 30 Rock, and I would stand at the security desk, and the PA would come down. The PA was Mark Torgove, who became a big writer and TV comedy producer. And he would, you know, take my jokes.
Hmm.
And I did it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Did I do it Friday? I did it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I did it every night. And I get a call Thursday night after the show from Morton. Now, Bob Morton, and I was the creative director to Catch a Rising Star. So I had access to all these people.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob Morton never called anybody back. He never called another comic back because he didn't have to. You know, if he was interested in you, he'd let him. And friggin' Bob Morton calls me and he says, "Dave did one of your jokes tonight." This is right after the taping. I went, "No." He said, "Yeah." And the joke was, I'll do the joke for you. It's 1991. He says, "Well, Elizabeth Taylor and her new husband, Larry Fortensky, had their first fight. It was over whether or not he should unpack." And you hear Paul go, "Ah," it was just the highest. So then I drop my stuff off. I come back to my house Friday, another call from Morton at 7 or 6:30 after the show.
Mm-hmm.
"Dave did another one of your jokes." He says to me, "You know, we got guys here. They don't get stuff on for months." And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, we're looking for a monologue writer." The main monologue writer was a guy named Larry Jacobson, another guy who went on to work on Married with Children for years, and then worked with Leno for years and years. And he was a monologue. he said, Larry Jacobson moved out to LA to work on, he's still submitting, but we don't really have a guy in-house. I said, well, what do you want me to do? You want me to write? He says, no. You've written enough. I'll be in touch with you. Well, I went out to Las Vegas with Adrian. We were working at the Tropicana the next week. And of course, this is all I can think about is this friggin' job. Right. And again, Morton is a guy that never calls you back. And sure enough, he called me the following Friday and said, can you come in Monday afternoon? And I said, sure. Well, we did 2 shows on Sunday in Vegas and we took the red eye back. And he said, yeah, because Dave wants to meet you. So I come in and I had met Dave, and I was a huge cigar smoker back then. Mm-hmm. I was never without a cigar. And Dave was a big cigar smoker. And Adrian said to me, can I give you one piece of advice? I said, sure. She said, do not go in there with a cigar because it'll look like you're sucking. And I said, You know what? You're right. And I felt naked without a cigar. So I walk in there and Dave looks at me and he says, I know you. He says, I saw you catch a rising star. I said, yeah. He said, and you came in with a couple of comics, because comics used to do that. I don't know if they still do it, but if you were on TV, you would bring a buddy with you to the tape. Yeah. He said, you came in with who'd you come in? I said, I came in here 3 times. I came in with Bill Maher, John Mendoza, and JJ Wall. And he said, and the last time he did, didn't you give me a cigar? And I said, yeah, I did. He says, where's your cigar? I said, well, I was advised not to have it. Well, let's get one out. And he breaks out 2 Cubans, and we just talked about cigars. And, it was him and his whole staff, or the Morton and his couple other people. And he says to me, well, he says, go and meet whoever you have to meet, and I hope we can work something out. And I'm thinking, what do you mean? Fucking ask me. What do you mean? So then I meet Steve O'Donnell, the head writer, who is, when they write the history of late night comedy, he gets a chapter and a half. That's how
he created the top 10 list, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yeah. Yes, he did. And then I met Morton. And Dave said to me, but come by and say goodbye before you leave. It's unbelievable. So I talked to Steve and I talked to Morton. We'll see if we can work something out. Oh my God, please. And now I go back to Dave and he's alone now. And he said, I got to tell you, he says, those jokes you gave me, they were just perfect. I said, well, I have your voice in my head. I said, I have others, but I have yours. And then I said to him, do you have any advice for me? And Dave notoriously never gave notes and never gave advice because he felt it would interfere with whatever your process was. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, listen, I don't care how good the joke it is. I don't care how good of a joke it is. If it's more than 4 lines, I won't use it because it can't fit on a cue card. And that's the only piece of advice he ever gave me. And I worked for him for 24 years, almost 25 years. And then I said to him, I wanted to leave, and I said, I hear your softball team needs a center fielder for what it's worth. Cause I was a pretty good ball player back then. I was a bit of a ringer. And he looked at me and said, we need everything. And I got hired the next day. So, so whenever I was at the show and people would ask me or call me and they would say, how do I get hired at the Letterman show? I would say, why are you asking me for? It took me 6 times.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
So that's that story.
There weren't a lot of stand-ups that wrote for the show, were there?
Back then, no.
Yeah, I know, like Rich Hall, maybe.
Richie Morris wrote for the first year. There were very, very, very few. And then Jeff Stilson wrote for a couple of years, my good friend Jeff Stilson. Louis C.K. wrote on the show for about 6 months. And No, because people had a feeling about stand-ups that, yeah, you do your little act. They just didn't think that we were capable of writing for anybody other than ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And now, of course, I mean, look, it's changed. The landscape has changed. But if I would say, let's say there's 10 writers on a show now, take any show, there's 10 writers. I bet you 8 of them are stand-ups or have done stand-up.
Yeah.
Because that's the landscape, because you're a stand-up, you're a writer, you have a blog, you have a podcast. It's all fragmented now.
Right.
And you're creating your own so it's very different.
Mm-hmm. Now, Chris Elliott had left when you got hired. He was already gone.
Then
right?
he came back. He came back at CBS. He came back for 6 months, and I knew Chris because he would come by, catch a rising star, and I knew him. I'll tell you the story. So he comes back to this show. He comes back to the show at CBS, and he liked me, loved Adrian, and so I don't know that he can slip in and out of that Chris Elliott character.
Mm-hmm.
All I know is that he's a sweet guy and he's funny. I don't know about that he can go back and forth like it's nothing. So one time he comes into my office and he says to me, it's like his second day there. He says, is there any place where I can get like a pen or some paper? And I go, yeah, sure, the supply closet. He says, well, where's the supply? I said, okay, I'll show you. I take him downstairs. I go down the stairs, right? And it was on 12. And I go into 12 and I walk in. I swear to God, I was in the supply closet for 3 seconds. I hear the door close. I turn around. He's completely naked. And he's like coming at me. And I laugh and scream and run away. And he's like doing the penguin walk after me. You bitch. and it was so, yeah. Yeah, I adore him. And then, he came back. He did some stuff that was funny, but
with Jerry Mulligan.
Yeah, but it was the show. The sensibility of the show had changed so much, and but I love him. Anytime he's in anything, you pay just a little bit more attention.
Oh
yeah.
No, he's one of my favorites.
He's just, I can't say enough good stuff about him.
Yeah. Now, are you writing mostly monologue stuff, or are you writing desk pieces and stuff as well?
I wrote some desk pieces. I wrote some top 10, but my main focus, I was, 75% of what I wrote. Now at NBC, it was, I would say at NBC, it was 50% monologue, but because the monologue was shorter.
Mm-hmm.
When we went to CBS, it was 8, and then it went to 16 the last few years. So I worked on other stuff. I never did a remote. I mean, I was in a couple of them, but I never did a that's wrong. I wrote I mean, I would write jokes for remotes, but mostly it was I did the top 10. Mostly it was monologue, top 10, and then I would occasionally write. I would work on, if the desk piece came down, like new books or stuff, I would do a pass at all that stuff. But it was 75-25 for me.
How many monologue jokes were you writing? And then how many, well, you said like 8 would get on or 16 would get on. How many were you writing it per day?
I was writing I remember when I got hired at NBC, I said to Jerry Mulligan, who was with the show forever and worked on the monologue, I said, how many jokes do you write a day? He said, I write 7 in the morning and 7 in the afternoon. And I thought, how am I going to write 14 jokes a day?
Right.
And very quickly, that became 20. And then that became 30. And I would say it was about at the old show at NBC, it was 30, between 30 and 40 a day. And at CBS, it was 50. It was 50 a day. And now there were a lot of people. It was me, Mulholland, and Barry who wrote the bulk of his monologue at CBS. And there were other people, but there were freelancers, people that faxed in. And so on an 8-joke monologue at CBS, it would be, let's say, 4 from Mulholland and Barry, 2 from me, 1 from Mulligan, 1 from a freelancer. That would be the way it would, shake out.
Mm-hmm.
And they were great. They were Johnny's writers for 20 years. And they were very strong, and they adapted to Dave like that. They were great, and they were very prolific. And some days I would have a good day, but as I told people, you'd write 50, and Dave would check 10, let's say, and then so that means 10 would go on cards,
mm-hmm.
and then maybe of those 10, maybe 5 would make it into the final 8. And that was a great day. But there were very few great days.
Right.
And I quickly learned that, if you write 50 jokes a day and you get 10 checks, or you write 50 jokes and you get 0 checks, at the end of the day, you're still a writer. And that was what kept me going. I mean, of course I wanted him to say, hey, everybody else can go home. It's all you. But, and I also helped him put it together. I was the head monologue writer, which meant I edited it, and I did that for years. And then Steve Young took over that. Steve Young, by the way, is who you should have on here. Steve Young is the, and for my money, is the best all-around Letterman writer they ever had. He was so versatile. He was so versatile. I mean, Steve O'Donnell was the most influential, but nobody was more versatile than Steve Young. And so that was what it was. It's a volume business.
Right.
And so Dave, I would say that to get those 8 jokes, we looked at, there were about 300 jokes. In the same way, I would say to do a top 10, there were probably 300 items that you whittled. And I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, those were the best 10 items. but that's the thing about late night and strip shows versus sitcoms or anything else. It's a volume business. And 10 writers in 10 rooms can produce more material than 10 writers in one room. The only two, I mean, we would have a meeting at the beginning of the day to discuss various topics or whatever. But, it's not that scene where everybody's, that happened, but that would happen in an emergency. You just had to generate a lot of material every day.
Right. One of the things I really enjoyed about the show, and Howard Stern is good at this too, like sometimes the funniest person isn't always the professional comedian, so he would have like Arthur would do like Mike Singletary or Alan Coulter. Alan Coulter probably made me laugh harder than anybody on the show.
Well, I think that's a thing that, look, Dave was such an enormous personality and such a star that he never gets the credit for what he manifested around him. The fact that he loved people on the staff using them as actors. The fact that because everybody got caught up in the stupid ratings and all that friggin' nonsense.
Right.
You know, we never got credit for the fact that I love the fact that there was this, you know, this subtext on the show that Dave had this staff who had absolutely no respect for the fact that there was a show going on. Like Alan Coulter would be selling stuff, or would be, you know, or Paul would be interrupting him, or people would be walking out. I mean, we would do those interrupts with like Pat Farmer,
Mhm.
where Pat Farmer would like walk out and say, Dave, I saw that you weren't busy. You know, and it's like always stuff like that. I loved writing those. I wrote a lot of those interrupts. I also wrote the here's a bit that you could never do today. I wrote the bit about take your daughter to work day,
Oh, yeah.
which we did like 4 years in a row. And it's like I see Alan brought his daughter to work, and we would just get, you know, the prettiest intern, or you know, and I would tell the woman, I would say, just look bored and chew gum and not look at them. That's all you do. And it's like, Alan, I see Alan right. Alan, is that your daughter? Yes, it is. Alan, I don't remember you having a daughter. Well, I guess that would be none of my business, wouldn't it? You know, just and that was it. So there was, I mean, Joe Grossman.
Yeah.
And I defy anybody to come up with another person that can get, and this is not a professional actor, that can get a laugh just walking out. And Joe Grossman would do that time and time again. And we did a bit. I wrote some things for him. The other guys we loved, and Dave loved having, because Dave knew it was money in the bank. So there's a bit. I wish I'd written this. And the bit is that NASA has perfected a machine for the space station that can turn urine into drinking water. And we have somebody from NASA here. So now the scrim goes up, and there's Joe in a lab coat with a beaker. And he drinks whatever's in the beaker. And then he looks at Dave and says, forgot to turn the machine on. And okay, that's great. Now in the act 4, Dave says, let's check back with that guy from NASA. Scrim goes back up. Here's Joe with the beaker. Still urine, Dave. So my wife loved that bit so much. When she was in, my wife, she's in Sloan Kettering, and believe me, she knows the score. And she's in bed, and tubes, right, all coming out. And she'd be lying in bed, and I would see her start to shake. And she would just look at me and say, forgot to turn off the machine. Forgot to turn on the machine. So, yeah.
The show has been off for 6 years now.
6 years in May, yeah.
Yeah. Do you find yourself like missing hearing something you wrote, got a laugh because you did stand up before and then you went right into the show? Is that something you miss, or do you get that feeling from writing your articles and books and stuff?
No, no. Look, I miss the people because I was there 24 years. I miss the urgency because I was a newspaperman before that. It was the perfect combination for me of being a newspaperman and being a stand-up. And yeah, so I miss those two things. I don't wish that I was writing on a show in this day and age because it's changed so much. The sensibility has changed so much. I guess it had to. I wouldn't have liked, I believe, and I have no way of proving this, just the only thing is that I know the guy. I think that if we had still been on, I think about 6 months into the Trump presidency, Dave would have said, that's it.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to give him oxygen. I don't want to give him, and it would have been really tough, and we might have, so I don't envy what those other guys had to do for 4 years. But so I don't, a couple, Jesus, I think it was a couple years ago, I get a call. I mean, I'm having lunch. I get a call, and it's John Max, who was Leno's version of me.
Mm-hmm.
And he calls me and he says, I'm working on an updated version of Laugh-In. I need 50 jokes by 5. And it was 1:30. I went, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
I miss that. I wish that once a week somebody would call me and desperately need 50 jokes by 5. I love that. I don't want it. I don't want it twice a week. I'd like it once a week. That would be great for me. So I miss that.
Yeah. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I want to ask you about one of my favorite comic is Norm Mcdonald. You wrote on the ESPYs, the infamous ESPYs with him. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, let me just tell you my best Norm Mcdonald story.
All right.
So I knew him a long time, and he gets the gig at the ESPYs, and I get hired. And Norm was and is a degenerate gambler.
Yeah.
And I was a degenerate gambler, but I had stopped and kind of recently at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And like for a couple of years. And so when Norm was of the Saturday Night Live mentality, which is that you just hang out. So his writers hung out with him. So it was me, Jeff Stilson,
mm-hmm.
Frank Sebastiano, who wrote for us for years, very underrated joke guy. Ross Abrash, who was pretty damn good. And oh my God, I'm thinking, and his partner, he was also good. So we would hang out. So, you're just yakking with, and Norm nobody has his mind. So I'm talking to him about trying to live a life one day at a time without gambling. And I say to him, what I tried like a month ago, and I didn't think I'd like it, and I love it. And Norm said, cock. And I laughed, and I thought, I have to remember this formula. Because no one would come up with that.
Right.
5 years later, I'm working out with a trainer, and he says to me, you should start running. I said, I'm no good at it. I'm a sprinter. He said, look, you should run with someone who's a runner, and that way they do all the talking, and you just kind of keep up with them. I have a guy who I train. He ran in high school, and he's looking for somebody to run with. He's a nice guy. So great. So we start running around the reservoir in Manhattan. And he's a lovely guy. And he was what we call a civilian. He was not in show business or anything, and so he would just talk about work, and he would talk, he was in finance or something. So we're running around the reservoir, and I'm just trying to keep up with him. It's like the 3rd or 4th time that we've done it. And he's telling me about work. He said, hey, what I tried like a month ago, and I never thought I'd like it, and I love it. And I go, cock? He doesn't say anything for the rest of the route. Now we're walking down 5th Avenue on the cool down, and he says to me, hey, listen, about that cock remark, I'm gay, don't you? And I say, well, I know now. And I thank Norm Mcdonald for that story. But I've been waiting 5 years.
Yeah.
Now, one time, and this reminds me, Jack Hanna, who was just a tremendous guest and we love. And so he's on the show one time. And Dave, and I'm not telling you anything that anybody doesn't know. Dave Letterman, nobody harder on himself than Dave Letterman. So it's Jack, and it's a great segment as always, and this and that. And Jack brings out like some kind of python or something at the end, and he says, this snake, this snake is worth like $60,000, and ooh. So now, and that's it. That's the python. The segment ends. He leaves. So I go up to Dave, and I say, 60,000. How much to lease? And Dave laughs, and then he goes, damn it.
Yeah.
Why didn't I think of that? And he's beating himself up for the rest of the show, and he keeps looking at me like he can't believe that. It's like, well, you've got a lot going on. I'm just under the stairs here.
Right.
5 years later, and many, many Jack Hanna appearances later. Jack Hanna comes on. He's got a cockatoo or a mongoose. This is very rare. This is like $75,000. And Dave says, how much to lease? The audience explodes, and Dave just looks over at me. I waited. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, but that's the genius of Dave Letterman too. So
yeah. Tell me a little bit about your band, The Truants.
Well, this is, we're looking forward to getting back to work.
Right.
I started a band 10 years ago. I wrote, my second book was called Time Won't Let Me. It was based on a true story. It was inspired by a true story. My brother's band in prep school, they made a vanity album in 1967. And then 15 years later, the album was worth like $1,500. It was the most valuable album of its kind. It's now the same album's worth 10 grand now. And collectors occasionally get them back together because they sound the same. And they were just a little better than most groups' garage bands. And they did original material. So my book was a little darker, that the album was worth 10,000, was 30 years later. They couldn't get out of their own way to get back together. And I made up some stuff, and some stuff was real. And I called the band The Truants, and just because. And the book came out, and a lot of people said, this is the most authentic book about a band I've ever read. And I'd never been in a band. I just had been staring at my brother's band or whatever. So I went and saw a guy that had given me a nice review, and he was in a band, and I said, boy, your band is great. The only thing that would have made it better is if your drummer had dropped dead of a heart attack. And he said, are you a drummer? I said, yeah, but I don't play anymore. And he said, well, you should go down to this musicians collective. And I went down there, and I joined it, and I met some guys. And after 2 years of playing weekend jams and kind of getting my chops back, I said, I don't want to play Neil Young. I want to play the stuff I want to play. And I put together my own band. And that was 11 years ago, 11 years this month. And a couple of the original guys are still in it. And we play British Invasion and garage covers, nothing after 1967. And we have the benefit of being good. And we are available, thetruantslive.com, and we're on YouTube, and we the thing that everybody says about us, they love the music, but they love how much we love playing it. And that's the thing. It's been a great joy of living thing for me. And it's been one of the great things I've done in my life. And I'm really proud of them because like I said, we're good. There's if you go on YouTube, one of our last gigs at Daryl's house, which is Daryl Hall's club in Pauling, New York. We played there, and Paul and Dave came, and Paul sat in with us.
Oh, really?
And Paul loves us. And so that's it's been a great thing. There are T-shirts available. On Venmo, you can @Bill dash Scheft, and all that's available. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite musical moment?
Oh boy. Well, I have to say, we got into the cutting room in Manhattan, which is, pretty tough place to get in. And we did really well our first time. And it was really, and I remember doing a sound check. We were doing a sound, it's such a great room. We're doing a sound check. And after 2 songs, I said to the guys, let's get out of here. We're never going to sound this good. And that was a great night. And they invited us, they booked us right back 3 months later. And we came back and we had another strong show. And, but the lighting is right. And, they look good. And I came off stage and the owner said to me, how does it feel to get a standing ovation? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And that was the fact that I didn't see it is even better than having said, it's like, you know what? I think I'm right about this. And I think I'm right about these guys. And that was a great thing. And we use a couple of lead guitarists. They're both great, but we use a guy named John Merjave, who's in a group called the Weaklings, who has a record deal, and he's been in with 1 million bands, and he's like a Beatle savant. And John Merjave could play with anybody, but he chooses to play with us. And so to me, it's like, well, how bad can we be? Mm-hmm. So that's a great thing.
You mentioned your book. I read Shrink Thyself in the beginning of the quarantine. I need to get the others, but I just wanted to say I really enjoyed it.
Well, that was, I'm most proud of that because that was my most ambitious book. Mm-hmm. I mean, my first book, The Ringer, is nearest and dearest to my heart. And during the quarantine, I finished my sequel to The Ringer that I've been working on for 8 years. So that was, but that's, I love all my, they're like my children, and I never had kids because there was no money in it. But, but thank you for saying that.
Yeah, no problem. And I'll end on this. What's one thing you know now that you wished you'd known when you were first starting out?
That they it's the only, I don't understand how people teach stand-up or they teach comedy writing, because to me, it's a 45-second curriculum, which is put the very funniest word or phrase at the end of the joke. Mm-hmm. But that's it. That's the only rule to me.
Yeah.
Because it would be like me saying to you, I'm going to kill you after I finish folding this laundry.
Right.
That's it. That's it. I wish I knew that. I wish I had known that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had an idea about it, and then I knew it, and then it became my religion.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing this, man. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun. You do a lot of these, and a lot of them are okay, and some of them you remember, and this one I'm going to remember. Oh, thank you, man.
Good luck to you. Good luck to you.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for thinking of me.
Thank you.
All right, take care. All right.
Hey, baby, I hear the blues are calling. Tossed salads and scrambled eggs. Mercy. And maybe I seem a bit confused. Yeah, maybe. But I got you pegged. But I don't know what to do with those tossed salads and scrambled eggs. They're calling again. Scrambled eggs all over my face. What is a boy to do? Mabry has left the building.